Welcome to this edition of AnTir Craftsman.
Hello, I'm Octar Wolfkiller. I'm going to be showing you how to do a pair of turn shoes. These specific turn shoes are going to be Jorvik boots, and they're going to be done with the flesh stitch. Because they're a turn shoe, they're going to be made inside out first, and then eventually they'll be flipped right side out. As an example, here's what the finished product will look like. What you see before you are the leather and all the other necessary equipment and tools to do a pair of shoes. The leather would be cut in advance from a pattern if you already have an existing pattern. If not, that would be a different class. You'll need both the left and the right. These are basically mirror images of each other. The sinew, you can use real sinew. This comes from the back part of an animal, preferably elk or deer, preferably elk or moose, much longer. It'll then be stripped down into individual lengths. This is artificial sinew. Artificial sinew is considerably cheaper, easier to get a hold of, and much longer. I recommend using this unless you really want to use the real sinew. The needles you'll be using are double-aught needles, leather working. The next set of tools would be the awl for punching the holes in your leather. The marking wheel, this is 1/4 inch indent from tip to tip. So when you roll it across your leather, you're going to get a consistent 1/4 inch spacing. This tunnel skive, this is designed to actually keep a consistent line from the edge where you will be marking your holes. Pliers, jeweler's pliers or bead making pliers. The reason why you want to use those is they don't contain any ridges on the inside, so you're not scoring your needles. When your needles get scored, they then will cut the sinew when you're crossing through and bind up in your leather, which makes it harder to pull the needle through. The leather should not be any narrower than 1/8, and this, as you can tell, is considerably thicker, but the thicker it is, the easier it is to work with for getting consistent markings and consistent holes. Because when you're doing the flesh stitch, you're not going to be going through both sides of the leather. You're going from the top end out the side of it, not through the bottom, so it will not go all the way through. This last piece, this is for actually marking your leather, so you're not going to be leaving big ink marks all the way around your shoes, and when trying to use pencil to rub off or erase, you can't really see it very well, so I recommend using a chalk wheel. I have used a marker here for demonstration purposes, and this is in silver for the black for contrast, and black on the dark gray or the dark brown, again for contrast, so we can see where I'm going. For making the toggles for the boots, there's going to be 3 per boot. The toggles are actually pretty easy to make once you've done it a couple of times. The trick is having the measurements down. Now, in this case, I'm doing these in quarters. Each one's about 1/4 in length. Mark them off again using your chalk wheel. Once they're marked off, then you're going to cut them. When you cut them, I recommend you use a cutting wheel on a cutting board or a sharp knife on a cutting board so you don't destroy any tables. This is an example of one that's already been done. It's been cut on each one of those lines across here, but don't go all the way through, because that's the meat of your toggle. You want to keep that part. So you're cutting this line, and this line. And you're going to be cutting this line on the outside here, and this line on the outside here to get this result. That line will also carry all the way down here, so you can cut these 2 pieces off. Again, the end result will look like this. Once it's cut out, you'll then lace this through the toggle, ending up with a knot at the end. Once that toggle is completed, you'll then stitch it usually around here on the shoe or whatever it is you're adding the toggle to. The toggle is laced in a specific order. I'm only using 3 holes in this toggle. It makes it easier to work. When lacing the toggle, you're going to start the pointy end, and you're using the side you want to see on the outside. It's going to go through the middle hole, pull it through, then it's going to go through the top hole. Lace that through. You're going to need to pull this in closer, pull some tension in, folding this top piece in on itself. Once that's folded in, again you're going to bring that that loop through, and you're going to go through the last hole. You will probably need pliers for doing yours. These are rather loose because I've already made these once, and I've taken them apart and put them back together again for ease of display. Pull through. It will create its own tension, locking it in place. Once that's completed, you can then carbouly the knot, or boil the knot, or leave it as it is, depending on how much of a rigidity you need to your leather, depending on how supple your leather was to begin with. The turn shoes, when you make the turn shoes of any shoe, when you're creating a pattern, you always have the marking lines that define where your points of leather come together. For these shoes, this and this point correspond to lining up with the upper to keep your front and back together. And this is also the same mark point that's on the soles, that way they all connect to the same point. With that guideline, it makes sure that your shoes all line up. With that in mind, when you start drawing your lines, the scaling tool make your lines going across the area, and then you would use the wheel from that point and work your way around the pattern. That would also correspond to that same line on the sole. You would start on that line and work to the toe and around the shoe to the heel, as this being the same as the top half of the shoe. Do not do it in reverse. If you do, you need to do it in reverse on the upper as well. They need to be consistent because those holes have to line up, or you're going to have a very uneven sew and a very unsatisfactory shoe when you're done. Once all the lines have been drawn, the holes have been marked, then you'll need to actually put the holes into the leather. For the flesh stitch, the holes, as said before, do not go all the way through the leather. You're not pushing straight down. You're marking the holes that way you can push through the flesh of the leather and come out the side edge of the leather. In this case, right dead center in the middle. The thicker the leather makes this easier to do. You would repeat that for each one of the holes going all the way around the shoe. And again, starting from that point, going all the way around, it doesn't really matter at this point because all your holes are already done, or all the marks are already done. So you're going to go through each one of those holes around the top. And the reason why you're seeing the smooth surface on this part of the shoe is because once the shoe is turned right side out, this will be displayed. The reason why this part is being displayed is because I eventually will glue a rubber sole onto this shoe, and the glue will adhere to the surface, whereas it will not adhere to this surface. You will also make sure that you put all the holes into the upper. Again, you've already marked them, so the holes should be in the correct place. It's simply just a matter of getting the leather and all so it comes out the side, again in the middle. Again, you'll repeat that process all the way around the shoe. The only time you would actually do a hole going directly through from top and out the bottom is for the outer edge. As an example, in turn shoe, that would be the top. So you can put the decorative stitch. But you will not see that decorative stitch on the sole, on the side of the shoe, where the seam is. That seam is virtually invisible because you're using a flush stitch. All the leather and all the sinew that has the holes is going to be in the inside of the shoe. When you're stitching the shoe together, again you're working with the shoe and the leather. The leather will be again worked inside out. This is the actual inside of the shoe. This will be the outside of the shoe. You have to do it inside in order for all the lacing and stitching to be held invisible to the eye. All these holes have been pre-done, so the needle is just simply pushed through the holes as you go. Starting with the corner, this will be done on each corner. Pull the needle through. Even the length out, this is a thread that's in the length of 1 yard. I'd rather work with a piece of thread that's going to be larger than what I need than too short. I can always throw away the excess when I'm done. It's not that expensive. And going through, again it's basically the middle of the leather. Pull the needle through. Now you're going to do the same thing for the other side. Problem is you've already got it anchored on the top, on the front half of the shoe, so you're going to have to work the hole through first. And shove your needle through. This can be a bit tricky. Sometimes you have to work it a couple of times to get the hole large enough. The reason why you're doing this is because you want to lock the two corners together, because that is the weak link at this point of the shoe. You're essentially trying to make that as smooth as possible, so that way when you stitch the upper together, the seam here, this will be one continuous piece of leather, which makes it considerably easier to stitch it to the sole of the shoe. Again, shoving the needle through. As you can see, all those edges or needle holes have been going through the middle of the leather. Like I said, this is considerably easier with a thicker piece of leather. Now that you've done this, you have that same thread going through each part. Shove that needle back in through the original hole at the top, pull it down through. You're essentially creating a triangle with your thread. You're not going to use that other one that originally came out this one. Go back through that hole in the other one. Now by pulling taut, you now have a nice even seam right there. From this point, you're now going to cross back and forth from one side to the other till you get to the top of the shoe. In that case, that would be the seam up here. Now that hole's already got the sinew through it, it's easier to shove that one through the other hole because you can find it now. Now before I put enough pressure on there to lock those two seams into place, all that sinew is going in between the two pieces of leather. It's not seen on the back side. Now I'll tighten it down. Again, you want to make sure you're keeping the tension consistent the whole way through from top. And again, you don't see it on the other side. Repeat the stitch till you get to the end. So once you've completed the stitching pattern from the triangle corner that you made down here to line up those two edges all the way to the very top, you'd be, inclined to want to tie a knot and tie it off. I don't recommend doing that because remember, this is going to be the inside of your shoe. You're going to be able to tap this down with a hammer to make it smoother, but you're not going to want to have a knotted leather or sinew inside your shoe rubbing on your foot. What I recommend is then reversing your direction, going back the way you came, about a half an inch to an inch, your preference, back through the same holes you went through. And the reason why you're doing this is because you're now locking your stitches in place. Anybody who's worked with a sewing machine, that's essentially what the sewing machine is doing when you're reversing your direction. It's considerably slower by hand, but the process is still the same. Then just keep on going down for about a half inch, and then cut off the ends of your thread, and you're done. Now that you've completed the stitching for the upper, to get the front and the back stitched together, again remember that this is the inside of the shoe. You will eventually flip it right side out. That will be the seam. Again, the leather, that will be the seam. Again, it did not come outside because the needle did not go through. Now when you're attaching the sole to it, the sole, the glossy part, is now facing out just like the rough side. Because again, once you flip the shoe out, right side out, that will be facing out and this will be facing out. So that this side glue can be attached to it to glue your sole onto it. The sole is basically a crepe rubber sole that's just rubber cemented to the rough leather. Once that's done, then I use shoe glue around the edge to give it a nice clean surface. To connect that sole, again it's going to be this side out. There's that guideline that's going to line up with the connecting seam there. Your needle's going to go through that diamond point again. Once it's through, the length of this thread is about 4 yards. The reason why I say 4 yards is because it's better to have too much than not enough, and you have to go all the way around the seam, and you're crossing yourself as you go. So you are going to be essentially using up quite a bit of material as far as the sinew goes, but you're not going to see it because it's going to be internal in the seam of the shoe. Once you've pulled that through so it's evenly divided between left and right needle, you're then going to run that needle through the other side, this thread, go through this side, and then out that point. You'll definitely need the pliers to help push it through, or you can use a table or flat surface to help give you leverage to shove the needle through. This through, pull all the way through. Then run it through as well. Now I went straight down instead of through the point at this for the other side because they're going to cross over each other. Keeping track of your thread is going to be something you need to pay attention to, otherwise you're going to tie yourself up in knots. Now that I've gone through here and down, I'm going to be starting back one hole behind that line. Run the needle through there to give myself a guide hole. Run that needle through. Again, you might have to enlarge that hole a couple of times. That's one thread through. So the needle again has to go through the surface. Now it's going through that line because that line is lining up here. So now those are lining up. Because there's still plenty of play, now is where you're going to go back through this hole over here, and then back through that line right there to lock it into place. That one's going to go back up through that previous hole. And then tension. Make sure you get good tension. Now from this point forward, you're going to work forward, going towards the toe of the shoe. And to do this, you're going to cross that needle back through that hole there, and then down, and then back and forth, left and right, till you get to the toe, and then work your way around. You'll work your way all the way around the shoe till you get to the heel, the shoe, and stop there. Then you'll set up another set of needles for here to work your way back down, connecting this part of the sole. And eventually both those two needles will end up at the very back of the shoe. The reason why you want to end up at the back of the shoe is if you need to take in a gather stitch because there's either too much space between the bottom and the top or too much between the top and the bottom. You have the ability to make any corrections you need to in that last ½ inch to 2 inches in the back of the shoe, and any of the corrections that you make will be less noticeable than if you had done it on the tip of your shoe. Because if you do it on the tip of your shoe, everyone's going to see that when you're coming. So once you have all that stitching completed, again you'll lock off the stitch like I showed you previously. Just reverse your stitch back down. In this case you'll be doing it with 2 sets of needles, 2 sets of threads, and locking off again back at the heel. Once it's all stitched together, your shoe will be inside out. I use a handle of a hammer or some dowel that's got some strength that'll push through the toe. The toe will be then worked through the shoe, and then basically everything gets reversed, and then you'll have the nice shiny side out the soft felt side inside. The sole will have the felt, so you can then glue your sole onto the bottom. And then you'll attach your lasts internally like this. Be sliced on there. You could attach your lasts on the outside if you want to, but the extant finds that I found, this has typically been the style that they've used. It does vary from region to region, so there's no specific law that says you can't have it all on the outside or on the inside or a mixture of the two. You generally want to keep them all consistent for that pair of shoes though. The toggling, basically in this case I used a separate type of leather. The reason why I used the other leather is because it was considerably thinner than the initial leather I was working with, without having to shave it all down. To get those through. Well, I hope the class was informative and useful. If you have any further questions, I'll be at 12th night. You can also go to my Facebook page. It's Octar Wolfkiller. There's photos of other shoes I've done. There's also some information and overviews of some classes I've taught before. I'll also be teaching another class overview for those people who've already made shoes at Sport of Kings. Cheers.